Hi everyone, the topic for this week is power. Okay, so for the topic of what is power, we're gonna compare the view of Max Weber and Hannah Arendt. Their main question will be explained as what is power and where does it come from? Okay, so let's look at the Max Weber first. According to Max Weber, power is the possibility of one actor in a social relationship to carry out his or her will in the face of resistance, regardless of the foundation on which this possibility depends. In other words, regardless of the resistance, a person with the power can push their will to others. That is how power is defined. When we look at the characteristics of power, first, power is a relationship phenomenon that occurs between actors. The power exists between at least two actors who can be individuals, groups, organizations, and nations. Only with a sole person, power cannot exist. Further, power is relational in that A can have more power over B, but can have less power than C. So, in sum, power involves at least two people as it exists in the relationships among people. In the relationship, the power is relational among people when thinking about how powerful they are. The second characteristics of powers by Weber is that power is an instrumental phenomenon. Power cannot be an end in itself. It is an instrumental phenomenon that arises from the process of overcoming actors of resistance or conflicts of interest to enforce one's will. In this case, the goal is enforcing one's will to others. If one has more power, the person has higher possibility to successfully enforce their wills on others. Another way of explaining this is that for people, they have their will. In order to enforce their will to others, they use power. For example, the reason students are punished for being late for classes is from the power from the teacher that we will discuss in the later slides more. The third characteristics of power is that power is resource dependent. Power is grounded on resources that include violence to legitimized methods. In this case, resource for power includes legitimacy, rewards, expertise, attraction, coercion, and trust. In other words, if the person has legitimacy, such as their position as teacher, they have the power to have students to follow the class rule. Another legitimized power under capitalistic society is economic gain that offers an important basis for power. Also, in democratic society, elected officials can also have legitimized power from the winning of the election. As we can see from the examples, as power is resource dependent, it is contingent and strategic. A's power over B depends on B's acceptance. B's acceptance. In other words, depends on how much it is beneficial or the penalties the power involves. People decide whether they should follow it or not. According to Weber, authority is the possibility of an actor in a social relationship to carry out his will in the face of resistance, and the foundation on which this possibility depends on uh, the possibility depend depends on legitimacy, and in other words, the authority is the legitimate foundation for power. Legitimacy comes from following socially accepted methods. Okay, on which, so go back to the Weber's argument on the slide, and the foundation on which this possibility depends must be legitimate. Okay, that was what should be explained properly. Okay, so going back to the next slide, Weber suggested three types of authorities based on legitimacy. This answers to the question of where does this authority comes from. The first is the legal authority. This means the authority justified by the legality of a law or rule enacted under the principle of formal rationality. Under this authority, obedience is based on impersonal order that describe the positions. In simple terms, people follow laws. Also, an officially defined position defines the legitimate scope of command authority, and the person in that position exercises authority within that scope. This means that rules define the scope of the order that certain official position can exercise. For example, police has the legal authority to arrest people who committed crimes because their position legally allow them to do so. The second authority is the traditional authority, meaning the authority justified by a belief in the sanctity of long-standing traditions that or by a sense of the validity of what has always been standing traditions that or by a sense of the validity of what has always been. In other words, this means that because it was always has been like that throughout the history, people accept it as legitimized authority. In this case, obedience is based on traditionally defined order of positions, and people show personal loyalty based on customs like respecting elders. The examples include inheritance or religious based authority. Inheritance refers to being someone's children or relatives with authority gave them authority, or someone believed to be anointed by God or gods gave him or her authority. The third one is charismatic authority. This authority is given to people who has a heroic personality. For this case, obedience is depending on personal beliefs. If someone is attractive and charismatic enough, it can create them authority from the followers. Further, Weber believed that the state is a legitimate monopoly of physical coercive power over the population. Because of the reason, the state is the sole source of the right to use violence. The distribution of command among different organizations is planned and an administrative and legal order that can assert broadly binding authority over all acts occurring within the jurisdiction of the state, which is changed through legislation. In simple terms, state has the legitimate power to use coercive power, a power to use coercive methods, including violence over people who live in the jurisdiction. Politics, in this term, is the laborious competition following rules over access to the use of violence and coercion which can be legitimized. Politics is a competition over who access the use of legitimate power of the state. Bureaucracy, on the other side, is a systematic tools for a state to function efficiently. Okay, so that was about the Max Weber, and let's see how Hannah Arendt thought about the power. Hannah Arendt had different views over power. Before discussing further, let's look at the background first. It came out as the criticism for the traditional concept of power, which focuses on violence and not real power. Arendt looked for concepts of power and law that do not inherently rely on a relationship of command and obedience uh, and that do not equate power with domination or law with command. She believed that the ideal type of power can be found in Athens public space. It was a place that engaged people where politics happens. At the time, the public space, often called as agora, is the place where people communicate for many different issues. When communication begins, she believed that communal power emerges. When it does, the issues in the communication become public agenda that pressure people to respond to it publicly. So that is the power according to Hannah Arendt. So let's look at it in depth. Okay, Hannah Arendt suggested the concept of communal power. She believed that, first, power depends on the possibility of people acting together in concert. It is an important factor. Power comes from people acting together in concert. She thought that to grasp at such power, people have to appear each other in a space in which the relationship between or among people is not a relation of despotic rule. In other words, no one has the absolute power over others in the space. Also, it is never the property of an individual, but it belongs to the collective. So, this can be viewed that no one has the control over the space, the public space, where it belongs to collectives. The meaning that a person has a power is that he or her is authorized by a certain number of people to act in their name. In this system, if the people who authorized the person to have a power disappears, the power disappears as well. The power only exists when others allow them to have power within the collective system. Okay? And according to her second point, power is an end rather than a mean. This power assumes the collective, meaning that as long as participants reach to agreements or consensus and create support through communication, power exists. This power is not A, coercing their will, and B, it is, again, communal power emerged within the communication. Issue becomes public agenda that pressure people to respond to it publicly, not privately. Okay, let's see her third point. Third, she viewed that power is different from authority and violence. In her explanation, authority is something that is attributed to a person or position and relies on the unconditional approval of those who are asked to submit it. And therefore, respect for a person or position is necessary to maintain authority. It is between people with authority who requires admission from others who are submissive, and it depends on others' approval. Okay, and coercion can be a synonym for violence according to her view. She thought that power doesn't need justification, as it is embedded within political community. Ultimately, the legitimacy emerges when people gather and act. The difference between violence and power is that violence can be justified but not legitimized, while power can be legitimized. Ultimately, activation of a public space that doesn't need justification pursues power as a goal and that can create power. In simple terms, power exists within people who communicate and act together in the political community. Okay, let's look at the summary of Max Weber and Hannah Arendt and how they view power. Okay, and they had a different approach to explain power. The power by Weber emphasized the coercion, while Arendt emphasized the communication part. Weber saw that power comes from legal authority, while Arendt saw that comes from communal power from communication. Weber saw that power relies on obedience and order, while Arendt saw it as people act in concert. And further, Weber saw power as a mean, while Arendt saw it as an and. That, that can be a meaningful difference here. And further, while Weber saw that power is used to enforce one's will to others, while Arendt saw power as a pressure within collectives. I hope this helps you understand the difference of power explained by Max Weber and Hannah Arendt. And in addition to this, also the Max Weber's power emphasized the command authority, which grounds on the official position and how the rule defined the scope of the order. However, Hannah Arendt's power emphasized more on authority with respect that happens within the political community as a collective. And also, she had this idea from Athens public space, in other terms, agora. And I think that explains the difference between the two. Again, Max Weber's point focused more on the relationship between actors, how one enforces or pushes their will on others. However, Hannah Arendt's power is more of the power created within the collectives and the pressure with each other within these collectives. Okay, I hope this explains and again helps you understand better with the approaches. Okay, so this will be it for this week, and we will gonna talk more about it in the class.